Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays. Today's champion is one that I was a bit reluctant to cover because there were a lot of instances in the past where he shot up to over 10% pick rate and had several periods where he was top dog, pick or ban, super OP. However, there are just as many periods of time where he's never picked or banned, but after seeing numerous requests to cover him throughout my videos and the demand for that video increasing, I figured we might as well just do it. For this episode, we're going to be covering Viktor, the Machine Herald, and one of my favorite mages to play. He's a champion with a very interesting mechanic. Prior to the Season 11 item rework, his passive provided him with a unique item known as the Hex Core. He started out with a prototype Hex Core and was able to upgrade that up to 3 times by spending gold in the shop. Subsequent upgrades of his Hex Core increased the ability power and mana per level the item provided, along with giving him the option to augment one of his 3 basic abilities for bonus effects. The final version of the item was the Perfect Hex Core, which cost 3,000 gold. It would give him up to 180 ability power and 450 mana, making it incredibly gold efficient once you get to level 13, 14, and beyond. For a personal item, it was certainly well worth the effort to upgrade this thing, although most of the time people would just get it to Mark 2 and then go for more practical items such as Spellblade or to stock up on cooldown reduction. As of Season 11, the Hex Core was completely removed, instead requiring Viktor to get his hands on 300 Hex Fragments, which would be given to him through farming minions and monsters and scoring takedowns on enemy champions. The upgrading concept remains unchanged though. Before we talk about any of his problems, I need to explain his abilities due to the interactions between them and his passive. His Q is Siphon Power, a point-and-click projectile that deals magic damage and gives him a small shield. After using the ability, his next basic attack instantly strikes his opponent and is modified to deal bonus magic damage. Augmented Siphon Power increases the shield he gets by 60% and a long-lasting movement speed buff after the projectile hits. Thanks to this ability's low base cooldown of 5 seconds at max level, it is possible to speed yourself up almost permanently with enough ability haste, and the bonus shield value is very much appreciated because he's a pretty fragile character. His W is Gravity Field, a device placed on the ground that slows all enemies within it. Every half a second an enemy stands on it generates a stack, and at 3 stacks they get knocked down and stunned for 1.5 seconds. Basically, it's a zoning field that he can put down to block off enemies, the same way Singe does with Mega Adhesive or Vgar with Event Horizon. Augmenting Gravity Field causes all of Viktor's damaging abilities to inflict a 20% slow debuff for 1 second. You may notice this sounds a lot like Rylai's Crystal Scepter, and it is. His augmented W used to be a mini Orianna ultimate, but considering how much he relied on Rylai's just to be able to play the game, Rai changed his W to have that passive instead, which is very nice to have. His E is Death Ray, a directional skill shot that deals magic damage to all enemies hit. Pretty standard offensive ability you would see on any mage. Augmenting Death Ray would cause an aftershock to explode in the same spot the ability was used. So you can think of it like Vel'Koz's Tectonic Disruption or Poppy's Hammer Shock, where it would deal damage in an area twice. Finally, his ultimate, Chaos Storm. Viktor summons a singularity at a target location which disrupts channels and deals damage on cast. The summon would then remain active and pulsate every second up to 6 more times, during which you could command it to target a specific champion or follow your cursor just like it were Annie's Tibbers or Shaco's clone. Now, to augment this one, Viktor has to first upgrade his Q, W, and E, which would then make the Chaos Storm automatically upgrade to move 25% faster, so it would be slightly harder to outrun unless you were a really fast champion. There are 2 things about his kit that are worth focusing on. The first is its surprisingly high self-utility. Even though battle mages are known for their self-sufficiency, that usually comes in the form of a defensive skill like Vladimir's Sanguine Pool. Viktor's Q grants him a burst of movement speed and a shield, his Gravity Field can be used for zone control, and the augmentation gives his abilities persistent slowing. Finally, Chaos Storm can be used to disrupt channels. He comes with a lot of tiny bells and whistles that you don't really see among his peers. What's even more noteworthy is the sheer power that dwells within this man's kit. Viktor's ability power ratios are beyond insane. Combine both instances of damage from Siphon Power, that's 100% AP. The shield itself has a 32% ratio. Death Ray and the Aftershock together have 130%, and all ticks of Chaos Storm bring you to 370. Viktor's pressure in the late game can arguably surpass that of hyper carries to the point where he can solo 1v9 games off of his own damage alone. Even though battle mages are known for their really strong DPS and carry potential in teamfights, late game Viktor might just be in a class above them. Granted, I don't think anyone disagrees with his amazing scaling, and few people would complain about having Viktor on their team since he's basically your insurance if the game goes long. He boasts an effective, dangerous, and versatile arsenal, capable of dominating matches, especially when piloted by a good player. So then if that's the case, why is his play rate so inconsistent? Sure, there are times when he was buffed and nerfed to balance him out, but that shouldn't be causing him to swing so far in one direction or the other. The answer to his fluctuating pick rate stems from the way he reaches his power spike. Unlike other late game scalers who ramp up after an item or a few levels, Viktor depends on augmenting his abilities since the base versions are very weak. But the only way to get those power spikes quickly is by engaging in combat with enemy champions. That wouldn't be too big of a hurdle, except he has one of the weakest early games out of any champion. Essentially, he's a late game champion with a feast or famine mechanic. After the change, Viktor needs to acquire 300 hex fragments to upgrade all of his abilities. While it is possible to slowly accumulate them by farming minion waves, he would still need to reach over 200 CS, which means he can't get all 3 upgrades until well past 25 minutes. One other thing is that prior to augmenting death ray, Viktor's wave clear is awful. Due to his high mana cost, long cooldown, and low base damage, it's almost impossible to last hit under tower on this guy. Other scaling champions like Ryze and Azir have at least pretty reliable wave clear and can hold priority reasonably well. Viktor can't, so farming to max out your hex core is anything but a good idea. On the other hand, takedowns give him 25 hex fragments each, so by getting a combination of kills and assists, you can expedite the process quite dramatically. But again, Viktor's early game is abysmal, so fighting isn't exactly in your best interest either. That's the one thing about him that I think turns off many players. You need to get those upgrades before the chances of winning slip through your fingers, but the only way to get them fast is to risk your life. Ordinarily, champions who are feast or famine tend to be good or at least decent in the early to mid game, lane bullies like Pantheon and hyper carries like Master Yi. Even though Master Yi needs a few items to get going, it is possible to cheese a couple kills on him, especially if you take Hail of Blades. No combination of early game purchases or runes allows Viktor a safe or cheesy way to do that, and unlike Nasus and Veigar who have no problems just AFK farming minions, Viktor will take too long to power spike if he just farms. I understand why they changed this passive to not require you to buy hex core anymore, it's because of the way mythic items work and all that, but objectively speaking, it was a nerf. Before, assuming you had perfect CS, you would be able to get 300 gold by, I think, 12 to 13 minutes. So before, you could actually farm for your power spike. Now, you almost have to go for fights. The last time Viktor was super popular was in late Season 8 when Riot made some changes to his kit that allowed him to abuse the living hell out of Kleptomancy. This gave rise to tank Viktor since he would be able to outtrade everybody with his massive shield, becoming basically invincible if you were playing a bruiser or tank. Also, because of how spammable his Q was, he could get so many procs of Klepto, which was the go-to rune for champions that needed to rack up gold as much as possible without wanting to fight. That's what caused his pick rate to skyrocket to almost 20% overnight. But with Klepto gone, he spent the entirety of Season 9 and 10 in the 2 to 3 percentile because there was no longer a cheesy way for him to scale. To make matters worse, Viktor's decline in popularity directly coincides with the change of League's game state. Much like other champs you've seen in previous Why No One Plays, he rarely is able to reach that 1v9 potential because he gets hard countered by divers and assassins. While he's not as fragile as that of AD carries, Viktor is extremely matchup dependent and runs into losing matchups more often than he does winning ones in this high snowball high skirmish meta. The most popular solo queue champions are Slayers and Fighters, champions like Yasuo, Diana, Sylas, and LeBlanc who effortlessly outtrade him in the laning phase and are way more threatening in early game 2v2s and 3v3s. Until he augments his Q, his defensive parameters are non-existent. He doesn't have a get off me tool the way Vladimir or Cassiopeia does, nor does he have any form of sustain. Though once he augments Death Ray, he can apply a bit more lane pressure since he clears an entire wave with just one E. If it were just his lane opponent, that would be one thing. But when was the last time you've played in the mid lane where the enemy jungler and or support left you alone? I'd wager you can't remember. In an era where champions are able to dive onto you from 2 screens away, Viktor is one of the most gankable targets in the game. Sitting in top lane won't do you much good either. Sure, you may not have to worry about getting ganked as much, but which champions are played top? Fighters and Slayers. Viktor gets murdered by Riven, Camille, Fiora, Wukong, Renekton, like 90% of the cast up top. To clarify, I'm not saying he insta-loses and there's nothing he can do about it, but when you consider how important getting his ability upgrades is, it's pretty discouraging to know that he doesn't have the most favorable matchup spread due to his worthless early game. That's also another thing. Viktor almost never has lane priority until he gets his E upgrade, so farming safe under tower is actually a net loss for your team because your lane opponent can roam to build a lead elsewhere while you can't do anything about it. And while we're on that, what makes the situation so annoying is that Riot went ahead and made every late game scaling champion have an easier time in the early game. Sion gets bonus health from Soul Furnace faster, Nasus can stack Q much faster than 5 years ago, same with Veigar's passive, Kael's range upgrade is now level 6 instead of level 11, Ryze's spell flux now bounces to multiple targets on first cast instead of needing to throw out 2, Tryndamere's free base stats have been yeeted into the ceiling. Literally every super scaler has gotten so many buffs to decrease the time it takes for them to get going because Riot realizes games are ending too fast. But they actually went ahead and did the opposite on Viktor by making his early game weaker. He's like top 20 strongest late game champions if I'm being completely honest, maybe even top 10 depending on circumstance, but getting to that situation is so difficult and unpleasant that people would rather pick any other mage with a more consistent early game even if it meant being not as effective later on. But okay, let's assume you survive the first 15 minutes of a match, you score a few kills and assists thanks to a little jungle help, and you're all set and ready to hard 1v9 carry. There's just one other problem. In the previous Why No One Plays episode, I mentioned that Vi's long animation times make her otherwise serviceable kit worse than it looks, since unlike auto attacks, you can't make them faster through building attack speed or some other item. Viktor has this exact problem. His two most damaging abilities, Death Ray and Chaos Storm, are locked behind very long delays, both of them taking a full second before applying the next instance of damage. Moreover, 3 of his 4 active abilities are position dependent, meaning you can avoid almost all of his pressure just by walking away from where you're standing. I think you understand why this is a problem. Battle mages are known for their amazing area control, so it's not unusual for Viktor to specialize in taking over battles through his AoE. But since Gravity Field, Death Ray, and even Chaos Storm are only effective in the spots he places them, his immense AP ratios don't always get used to their full effect. There are other ultimates that do take a long time to do damage, such as Fiddlestick's Crow Storm, but he has ways to lock people in place for a very long time. That, and he's pretty fast, especially with Protobell. Chaos Storm, even with the move speed upgrade, is easy to outrun if the enemy champion has a dash, and since Gravity Field takes a second and a half to get the stun, you can straight up walk out of it most of the time. The problem with Viktor's damage is that it's not instant, it takes a long time to occur. I'm not necessarily saying it's so slow that he can't do anything, but it's hard for him to pin down moving targets because he doesn't have point and click suppress like Malzahar, nor does he have a massive grounding area like Cassiopeia. You know, now that I think about it, I feel like it makes more practical sense for Gravity Field to ground opponents. Singe's Mega Adhesive makes sense because, you know, it's a sticky puddle. But why does Miasma, a cloud of poison, prevent you from being able to jump out of it? You would think an ability that's literally called Gravity Field would weigh you down to the point where you can't dash out of it. But maybe that might just be too broken for him. I digress. That's another reason why Viktor is very matchup dependent. If he goes up against a lot of slow and clunky enemies such as Juggernauts and tanks, he performs really well since he can kite them out forever and deal damage more consistently. But against Slayers and Divers who have no shortage of dashes, blinks and such, he'd be lucky to land even 2 ticks of his ultimate before they get out of it. On the plus side, this makes him synergize really well with high lockdown or wombo combo team comps, and his pressure and choke points is incredible. Fighting in Dragon Pit, Baron Pit, or throughout the jungle is the best place for Viktor to be since there's very little ways for the enemy team to weasel their way out. That's especially if you put Gravity Field in the right spot to block off their escape. All the same, Viktor is a champion who depends too much on everything going perfectly for him to perform optimally. Leaving all those factors to chance is just not something people can really get attached to, which is why they only play him when he's super overpowered and ditch him the moment he goes back down to average or below average. Personally, I feel like one change that would make Viktor much more stable in the early game would be to improve his wave clear. It's fine for him to have long cooldowns, high mana costs, and low base damage, but the one thing he struggles with far too much is his poor wave management. If he can at least compete with other mid laners in terms of priority, that would make his early game a little more bearable. Despite what I said about his abilities being very easy to dodge, he's still a demon in the late game, he just needs to get there. Naturally, the early game does have to be difficult in order for Viktor to be balanced, but making him this stringent has the negative effect of preventing him from developing a very loyal following. Anyway, that's it for today. Let me know what your thoughts are on Viktor in the comments down below. For the time being, if you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated. Consider subscribing for more content like this. Don't forget to follow me on my socials and join my Discord server. Finally, if you haven't yet and you still have time, I suggest you check out my previous Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.